What if Julius Caesar was never meant to die? On the Ides of March 44 BC, as senators' daggers found their mark in the theater of Pompey, more than a man fell. The entire trajectory of human civilization shifted. Yet ancient fragments whisper of something else lost that day. Something hidden. Something that vanished just before the assassination. The conspirators struck with surgical precision, eliminating not just Caesar, but erasing traces of an object that classical sources describe in hushed, cryptic terms. An artifact that possessed the power to alter destiny itself. Was it a device? A sacred relic? A prophetic instrument that revealed futures yet unwritten? While historians debate the political machinations behind Caesar's murder, they overlook the deeper mystery. Why did certain items disappear from Caesar's private chambers in the days preceding his death? What did Brutus and his conspirators fear more than Caesar's life? His possession of something that transcended mortal power. The Roman Empire rose from Caesar's blood, but what empire might have emerged had this mysterious artifact remained in his grasp? What knowledge was deemed too dangerous for any ruler to possess? Some secrets are buried not in tombs, but in the shadows between recorded history. Tonight, we excavate the truth behind Rome's most guarded mystery and discover why some artifacts are meant to stay hidden forever. By 49 BC, Gaius Julius Caesar had transcended the boundaries of mortal ambition. His conquest of Gaul had not merely expanded Roman territory, it had transformed him into something unprecedented in the Republic's history. Gold flowed from conquered lands, veteran legions pledged absolute loyalty to his name alone, and his very presence commanded reverence that bordered on worship. Yet with each triumph, the chasm between Caesar and the traditional Roman aristocracy deepened into an abyss of mutual mistrust. The Senate, that ancient bastion of republican virtue, watched in growing alarm as Caesar's influence metastasized beyond political control. Senators who had once viewed him as a useful ally now whispered of tyranny in marble corridors. Marcus Porcius Cato declared that Caesar's very existence threatened the foundation of Roman law. Cicero, master of rhetoric, wielded words like daggers against the growing cult of personality that surrounded the returning conqueror. But Caesar's power extended far beyond military might or political maneuvering. Ancient sources speak of an inner circle bound not merely by loyalty, but by access to objects and knowledge that defied conventional understanding. Plutarch mentions sacred items of Eastern origin that Caesar kept in his private chambers. Suetonius references gifts from distant lands that bore the mark of divine favor. These were not mere trophies of conquest, they were artifacts that seemed to pulse with otherworldly significance. Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted lieutenant, served as more than a military commander. Contemporary accounts describe him as guardian of Caesar's most precious possessions, keeper of secrets that extended beyond the battlefield. Antony's frequent travels to Alexandria were officially diplomatic missions, yet certain chroniclers suggest he carried items of profound importance, objects that connected Caesar to powers beyond the Roman pantheon. The relationship with Cleopatra VII of Egypt added another layer of mystery to Caesar's arsenal of supernatural influence. The Egyptian queen brought with her not only political alliance and romantic entanglement, but access to the accumulated wisdom of millennia. Alexandria's great library housed scrolls containing knowledge that Roman scholars could barely comprehend, astronomical calculations, alchemical formulas, and ritualistic practices that blurred the line between science and magic. Cleopatra herself was no mere political figurehead. Trained in the esoteric traditions of the Ptolemaic dynasty, she possessed understanding of artifacts and symbols that could channel divine authority. Ancient Egyptian texts recovered centuries later reference the gift of Isis, bestowed upon the Roman who would be pharaoh. Historians have long debated whether this referred to Caesar's acknowledged paternity of Caesar Ion, or to something far more tangible and dangerous. Even more intriguing was Caesar's relationship with Servilia, mother of Marcus Brutus and perhaps the most influential woman in Republican Rome. Their affair was an open secret, but less known were the mysterious items she provided from her family's ancient collection. The Servilii claimed descent from legendary Roman kings, and their private vaults contained relics predating the Republic itself. Servilia's access to these ancestral treasures made her an invaluable conduit for Caesar's acquisition of objects that defied rational explanation. Contemporary sources hint at a particular artifact that arrived in Rome during Caesar's final year. Cassius Dio mentions a device of brass and crystal, bearing inscriptions in no known script, that caused great consternation among the augurs. The official college of priests, responsible for interpreting divine will, reportedly refused to examine the object closely, declaring it an abomination that offends the natural order. Yet the artifact's influence over Caesar was undeniable. Those closest to him observed a fundamental change in his demeanor after its arrival. Previously calculated in his political maneuvering, Caesar began displaying an almost supernatural confidence in his decisions. He dismissed bodyguards, ignored warnings, and spoke openly of plans that seemed to assume knowledge of future events. Senators who had known him for decades described feeling unsettled in his presence, as if some invisible force emanated from his very being. The soothsayer Spurina, famous for warning Caesar to beware the Ides of March, left more detailed accounts in private scrolls discovered during Augustus's reign. He described the artifact as a mirror that reflects not the face, but the soul's destiny. According to Spurina's notes, the object allowed its possessor to perceive the threads of fate that bound future events, a power that Caesar apparently believed made him invincible. Brutus himself, torn between filial loyalty to Servilia and republican duty, may have had direct knowledge of the artifact's nature. His mother's intimate relationship with Caesar provided access to secrets that few others possessed. Some scholars suggest that Brutus's final decision to join the conspiracy stemmed not from political ideology alone, but from understanding that Caesar's possession of the artifact represented an existential threat to human agency itself. The conspiracy that ultimately claimed Caesar's life operated with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of his movements and vulnerabilities. Yet ancient accounts hint at a parallel operation: the systematic removal of certain objects from Caesar's private spaces in the days preceding the assassination. Items mentioned in earlier inventories simply vanished, their disappearance noted only in fragmentary administrative records. Suetonius records that on the morning of the Ides, Caesar's wife Calpurnia reported that the sacred vessels had been disturbed in the night. Plutarch mentions that Caesar himself seemed agitated by the absence of customary protective items as he prepared to leave for the Senate meeting. These references suggest that the conspirators understood the need to neutralize more than Caesar's political power. They sought to eliminate sources of supernatural protection that might have preserved his life. The final verified mention of the mysterious artifact appears in Augustus's private correspondence, discovered in the imperial archives during Hadrian's reign. Writing to his advisor Maecenas, the first emperor refers to the device that Uncle Julius valued above all treasures, now hidden where it can bring no further corruption to mortal ambition. The letter's date places it 3 years after Actium, when Augustus had consolidated power and begun the systematic destruction of items deemed dangerous to imperial stability. Yet even this burial was not final. Later chroniclers hint at the artifact's persistence, its influence rippling through subsequent generations of rulers who sought to reclaim what Caesar had possessed. The pattern of disappearance and rediscovery, of desperate searches and strategic concealment, suggests an object whose very existence posed questions that Roman civilization was unprepared to answer. With Augustus's deliberate erasure of the artifact from official records, the last confirmed trace vanished into the shadows of imperial secrecy. Yet the questions it raised about power, destiny, and the price of divine knowledge would echo through the corridors of history, waiting for those bold enough to seek answers that empire itself had deemed too dangerous to possess. The month of Martius in 44 BC descended upon Rome like a gathering storm. Those closest to Caesar observed a transformation that defied rational explanation. The man who had crossed the Rubicon with calculated precision now moved through his final days as if walking through a waking dream, alternately seized by supernatural confidence and haunted by shadows that only he could perceive. Calpurnia's nightmares began on the calends of March. Night after night, Caesar's wife awakened screaming of visions that painted their marble villa walls with blood. She spoke of dreams where sacred objects turned to ash in her hands, where protective amulets cracked and crumbled at the moment of greatest need. The household slaves whispered that she had been found before dawn, wandering the corridors in her sleeping garments, searching frantically for items that had vanished in the darkness. Caesar himself exhibited behavior that alarmed even his most devoted followers. Mark Antony later confided to confidential correspondents that his commander had begun conducting strange rituals in the pre-dawn hours, consulting the mysterious artifact with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The brass and crystal device, once examined with scholarly curiosity, now seemed to exert an almost magnetic pull over Caesar's consciousness. He would spend hours in its presence, emerging from these sessions with eyes that reflected knowledge too profound for mortal comprehension. The soothsayer Spurina intensified his warnings as the Ides approached. His private journals, recovered decades later during renovations of the Temple of Jupiter, reveal the depth of his growing terror. He wrote of auguries that contradicted themselves, of sacrificial animals whose entrails bore markings that violated every principle of divination. Most disturbing were his accounts of the artifact's behavior during these final days, how it seemed to pulse with inner light when danger approached, how its crystal components shifted color in patterns that corresponded to no known astronomical phenomenon. Yet even as supernatural warnings multiplied, a more earthly conspiracy moved through Rome's shadows with methodical precision. The historical record reveals a curious pattern during these final weeks. Certain individuals began making preparations that suggested foreknowledge of dramatic change. Brutus liquidated significant financial holdings. Cassius arranged for the transfer of family valuables to distant provinces. Decimus Brutus canceled planned construction projects that would have extended well beyond the Ides of March. More significantly, these same conspirators demonstrated knowledge of Caesar's most private possessions. Servants later testified that unauthorized individuals had been observed near Caesar's personal quarters on multiple occasions. Items of seemingly minor importance, a particular scroll, a small bronze figurine, a leather case containing astronomical instruments, disappeared from their customary places. When questioned, household staff could provide no explanation for these vanishings. The artifact itself became the subject of increasingly desperate attention. Fragmentary accounts suggest that Servilia attempted multiple times to persuade Caesar to relinquish the object, citing concerns for his spiritual well-being. Her son Brutus reportedly grew agitated during family gatherings where the artifact was discussed, speaking in hushed tones of abominations that corrupt the natural order of governance. These conversations, overheard by slaves and recorded in later testimonies, reveal a growing conviction among certain Romans that the artifact represented a fundamental threat to republican institutions. Cleopatra's final visit to Rome, occurring just days before the assassination, carried significance that historians have only recently begun to appreciate. Egyptian diplomatic records, discovered in Alexandria's ruins during medieval excavations, reference urgent communications regarding the sacred trust that had been corrupted by unauthorized possession. The Queen's hasty departure from Rome, undertaken despite previously announced plans for an extended stay, suggests awareness of approaching catastrophe that extended beyond mere political calculations. On the 10th day before the Ides, a remarkable gap appears in the historical record. Multiple chroniclers who had maintained detailed accounts of Caesar's daily activities suddenly ceased their documentation. Cicero's letters, previously written with clockwork regularity, contain no entries for a 3-day period. Suetonius's later compilation notes the absence of official records from the urban praetor's office during these same days. Even household accounts and slave schedules show inexplicable blanks where detailed logs had previously been maintained. When documentation resumes, subtle but significant changes mark the narrative. Caesar appears increasingly isolated from his usual advisors. The artifact, previously mentioned in various contexts throughout winter accounts, vanishes entirely from contemporary sources. Not merely relocated or secured, completely absent from any reference, as if its very existence had been methodically erased from conscious memory. Brutus's behavior during these final days deserves particular scrutiny. Friends noted a transformation in his demeanor that paralleled, yet contradicted, the changes observed in Caesar. While Caesar grew increasingly confident in his invincibility, Brutus exhibited the haunted aspect of a man wrestling with knowledge too terrible to bear. His mother Servilia later claimed that her son had spoken of necessary sacrifices to preserve the soul of Rome and of objects that must be hidden from the light of day. The conspiracy's final preparations reveal coordination that suggests access to information beyond normal intelligence networks. The assassins positioned themselves with precision that implied detailed knowledge of Caesar's planned route, his likely companions, and the specific timing of his arrival at Pompey's theater. Yet this operational knowledge was accompanied by precautions that seemed designed to address supernatural as well as political threats. Multiple sources reference unusual items carried by various conspirators on the morning of the assassination. Casca bore a dagger wrapped in what witnesses described as cloth that seemed to absorb light. Cassius wore an amulet of unfamiliar design, later identified by Egyptian scholars as a protective charm against divine retribution. Most significantly, Decimus Brutus carried a small leather pouch that multiple witnesses noted but none could adequately describe, referring only to its unsettling presence and the way it seemed to disturb the air around it. The assassination itself unfolded according to documented historical fact: 23 wounds, death at the base of Pompey's statue, the conspirators' flight through Rome's stunned streets. Yet certain details recorded by eyewitnesses defy conventional explanation. Several observers noted that Caesar's blood appeared to flow in patterns that violated natural law, forming symbols that seemed familiar yet impossible to decipher. Others reported that the conspirators moved with synchronization that suggested rehearsal extending far beyond the physical act of murder. Most disturbing were the accounts of Caesar's final moments. Traditional sources record his famous last words to Brutus, yet palace servants who witnessed the scene from hidden alcoves left testimony describing additional phenomena. They spoke of a sound like crystal shattering that occurred at the moment of Caesar's death, though no crystal objects were present in the theater. They described a sudden change in atmospheric pressure, as if some invisible force had been violently released from earthly constraints. In the chaos following the assassination, while senators fled and citizens rioted, a different drama unfolded in Caesar's private residence. Household staff later testified that unknown individuals entered the villa within hours of the murder, moving through Caesar's personal chambers with purposeful efficiency. They removed specific items while leaving obvious treasures untouched. When Antony arrived to secure Caesar's effects, he found not random looting but surgical extraction of particular objects. The artifact that had commanded such attention during Caesar's final months was among the items that vanished during these hours of confusion. No trace remained save for a circular depression in the marble floor where it had customarily rested, and a faint residue that palace slaves described as shadow-made substance. Antony's frantic search through the villa revealed nothing, though witnesses reported that he wept openly upon discovering the artifact's absence. Within days of the assassination, a remarkable silence descended over all mention of the mysterious object. Senators who had previously spoken in hushed tones of Caesar's supernatural possessions suddenly claimed no knowledge of any unusual artifacts. Slaves who had served in Caesar's household developed convenient amnesia regarding items they had previously described in detail. Even augurs and soothsayers, traditionally eager to claim prophetic authority, refused to discuss the implications of the artifact's disappearance. The conspiracy's success extended beyond Caesar's death to encompass the complete erasure of evidence regarding the object that may have been his greatest source of power. Yet this very thoroughness raises questions that echo through subsequent centuries. What knowledge did the conspirators possess that drove them to such elaborate concealment? What force had they unleashed upon the world? And what price would history pay for their desperate attempt to contain it? As March faded into April and Caesar's funeral pyre cooled to ash, Rome itself seemed to exhale in relief. Yet beneath the surface, in the spaces between recorded words and the shadows cast by official silence, something far more profound than political transformation had occurred. The artifact's disappearance marked not merely the end of Caesar's ambitions, but the beginning of a mystery that would consume emperors, scholars, and seekers of forbidden knowledge for generations yet unborn. In the gathering darkness that followed the Ides of March, as Rome struggled to comprehend the magnitude of its loss, one truth emerged with crystalline clarity. Some powers are too dangerous for any mortal to possess, and some secrets demand burial deeper than any grave can provide. The systematic absence of evidence regarding Caesar's mysterious artifact has spawned theories that stretch across the spectrum of human imagination. Each hypothesis emerges from the same haunting question: how does an object of such apparent significance simply vanish from the historical record without leaving even the faintest trace? The very completeness of this erasure suggests intentionality that transcends mere accident or neglect. The skeptical foundation. Modern historians, trained in the rigorous methodology of empirical analysis, have constructed what they term the most rational explanation: the artifact never existed at all. According to this interpretation, later chroniclers, writing in the shadow of Augustus's propaganda machine, invented supernatural elements to explain Caesar's extraordinary confidence and the conspirators' desperate urgency. The mysterious object becomes nothing more than literary embellishment, a dramatic device designed to add mystical weight to political murder. This theory finds support in the documented tendency of Roman historians to attribute supernatural significance to pivotal moments. Livy's accounts of Rome's founding myths, Tacitus's descriptions of omens preceding imperial deaths, and Suetonius's catalogue of divine signs all demonstrate a cultural inclination to interpret political events through supernatural lenses. The absence of contemporary documentation regarding the artifact aligns with this pattern of retrospective mythologization. Archaeological evidence appears to support this skeptical position. Extensive excavations of sites associated with Caesar's final days have yielded no trace of unusual objects. The systematic cataloging of Roman artifacts from this period reveals nothing that matches the descriptions found in later sources. Material evidence, the foundation of historical certainty, remains stubbornly silent regarding any item possessing the extraordinary properties attributed to Caesar's mysterious possession. Yet this rational explanation confronts disturbing inconsistencies that resist comfortable resolution. The precision with which later sources describe the artifact's physical characteristics suggests knowledge extending beyond mere imagination. Multiple independent chroniclers, writing decades apart and drawing from different source traditions, provide remarkably consistent details regarding the object's dimensions, materials, and markings. Such uniformity rarely emerges from pure fabrication. More troubling is the documented behavior of figures who possessed no apparent motive for perpetuating supernatural myths. Cicero's private correspondence, discovered in fragments throughout various archaeological sites, contains oblique references to objects that disturb the natural order in contexts where supernatural embellishment would serve no rhetorical purpose. These mentions occur in personal letters never intended for publication, suggesting genuine concern rather than literary artifice. The skeptical position must also account for the extraordinary measures taken to erase evidence of the artifact's existence. If the object was merely mythical, why did Augustus invest such energy in eliminating references to it? The documented destruction of documents, the systematic silencing of witnesses, and the careful editing of historical records suggest a campaign against something far more substantial than literary fiction. What rational explanation exists for such elaborate concealment of a non-existent threat? The symbol of sacred authority. A more nuanced interpretation suggests that the artifact represented not supernatural power in literal terms, but rather sacred legitimacy that carried profound political implications. Throughout human history, objects have served as focal points for authority that transcends mere military or economic force. The crown of a monarch, the staff of a priest, the seal of an emperor. These items derive their power not from inherent magical properties, but from the collective belief in their significance. Roman culture, despite its reputation for pragmatic materialism, remained deeply rooted in religious tradition. The concept of imperium, the supernatural authority that legitimized governmental power, required tangible symbols to maintain its psychological hold over both rulers and subjects. Caesar's artifact may have represented the ultimate expression of this principle, an object that embodied divine approval for his unprecedented accumulation of authority. Evidence supporting this interpretation emerges from Caesar's documented behavior during his final months. His increasing disregard for traditional republican constraints, his open discussion of monarchical ambitions, and his apparent certainty regarding future events all suggest confidence rooted in more than military success. The artifact may have provided the psychological foundation for his transformation from successful general to aspiring god-king. This theory finds reinforcement in the reactions of Caesar's opponents. The conspiracy against him involved not merely political opportunists, but genuine Republicans who viewed his accumulation of power as an existential threat to Roman civilization. If the artifact served as a symbol of divine sanction for Caesar's ambitions, its elimination would constitute a necessary component of any successful effort to restore Republican government. The careful timing of the artifact's disappearance supports this interpretation. The object vanished not during the chaos following Caesar's death, but in the precise window when such a symbol could have legitimized his heir's claims to power. Octavian's eventual rise to become Augustus required the construction of new mythologies of authority. Caesar's artifact would have represented a competing source of legitimacy that could have undermined this carefully orchestrated transformation. Yet questions persist regarding the specific nature of the authority this symbol supposedly conveyed. Roman religious tradition encompassed numerous objects of sacred significance, yet none attracted the extraordinary attention apparently focused on Caesar's artifact. What distinguished this particular item from the countless other symbols that populated Roman spiritual life? Why did its possession generate such fear among seasoned politicians who had navigated the treacherous waters of Republican politics for decades? The symbolic interpretation must also explain the apparent supernatural phenomena associated with the artifact. Multiple witnesses described behaviors and events that extended beyond conventional religious symbolism. If the object derived its power solely from collective belief, what accounts for the specific physical manifestations reported by individuals who had no investment in perpetuating supernatural myths? The accident of history. Perhaps the most mundane yet historically plausible explanation attributes the artifact's disappearance to the simple chaos that engulfed Rome following Caesar's assassination. Civil war, political upheaval, and social disorder create environments where precious objects vanish without elaborate conspiracy or supernatural intervention. The artifact may have been destroyed by fire, lost during hasty evacuations, or simply misplaced in the confusion that marked the Republic's final collapse. This theory aligns with documented patterns of cultural loss during periods of political transition. The sack of cities, the burning of libraries, and the looting of private residences have claimed countless artifacts throughout history. Rome's civil wars were particularly destructive, consuming not only human lives, but also the accumulated treasures of centuries. The artifact could have joined the countless other objects that perished during this period of systematic destruction. Archaeological evidence provides some support for this interpretation. Excavations in areas of Rome that experienced significant damage during the civil wars have revealed scattered fragments of valuable objects, suggesting hurried abandonment and subsequent destruction. Fire damage appears frequently in archaeological layers corresponding to this period, indicating that conflagrations claimed substantial amounts of material culture. The testimony of household slaves, preserved in later legal documents, describes the frantic atmosphere that prevailed in Caesar's residence following his death. Valuable items were hastily packed and moved to secure locations, while other possessions were abandoned in the rush to flee potential retribution. The artifact could easily have been overlooked during this chaotic evacuation, left behind to suffer whatever fate befell the abandoned villa. Contemporary accounts of the period immediately following Caesar's assassination reveal a city consumed by fear and uncertainty. Citizens fled their homes, officials destroyed compromising documents, and anyone associated with Caesar's regime faced potential persecution. In such an environment, the careful preservation of artifacts would hardly constitute a priority, regardless of their supposed significance. Yet this explanation encounters difficulties when confronted with the specific evidence surrounding the artifact's disappearance. The systematic nature of its erasure from historical records suggests intentional action rather than random loss. If the object had simply been destroyed by accident, why was its very memory so thoroughly eliminated from subsequent documentation? Accidental destruction rarely extends to the obliteration of written references and oral traditions. More problematic is the timing of the artifact's vanishing. Multiple sources suggest that the object disappeared not during the general chaos following Caesar's death, but during a specific window when individuals with particular knowledge gained access to his private possessions. This precision argues against random destruction and toward deliberate action undertaken by those who understood the artifact's significance. The accidental loss theory must also account for the extraordinary efforts apparently undertaken to locate the missing object. If Augustus and his agents had simply assumed that the artifact was destroyed by chance, why did they invest such energy in hunting for traces of its existence? The documented searches, interrogations, and investigations suggest knowledge that the object had been deliberately concealed rather than accidentally lost. The Imperial Purge. The most politically sophisticated interpretation attributes the artifact's disappearance to Augustus's systematic campaign to reshape Roman historical memory. The first emperor understood that lasting power required not merely the elimination of political opponents, but the careful construction of new mythologies that would legitimize his unprecedented authority. Caesar's artifact represented a competing narrative that could have undermined these efforts. Augustus's propaganda machine, perhaps the most sophisticated in ancient history, worked tirelessly to present his rule as the natural culmination of Roman destiny. This narrative required the transformation of Caesar from potential tyrant into martyred precursor, a figure whose assassination created the chaos that only Augustus could resolve. The existence of an artifact that had legitimized Caesar's divine pretensions would have complicated this carefully crafted story. Documentary evidence reveals the scope of Augustus's efforts to control historical memory. Entire libraries were reorganized to emphasize materials that supported the imperial narrative while suppressing texts that raised uncomfortable questions. Historians received imperial patronage contingent upon their willingness to adopt approved interpretations of recent events. The systematic destruction of documents from Caesar's era formed part of this broader campaign to shape collective understanding of the past. This interpretation explains both the thoroughness of the artifact's disappearance and the specific timing of its elimination. Augustus possessed the resources, motivation, and opportunity to undertake such a comprehensive erasure. His agents could have secured the object during the confusion following Caesar's death, then methodically eliminated all traces of its existence from official records and private collections. The imperial purge theory finds support in parallel examples of Augustus's historical revisionism. The fate of Mark Antony's correspondence, the suppression of certain Republican texts, and the careful editing of Caesar's own writings all demonstrate the new regime's commitment to controlling historical narrative. The elimination of a powerful artifact that symbolized competing claims to authority would fit naturally within this pattern of systematic revision. Yet questions remain regarding the specific mechanics of such an operation. The elimination of physical objects presents different challenges than the suppression of written materials. How could Augustus's agents have ensured that no fragments, copies, or detailed descriptions of the artifact survived their efforts? The complete absence of archaeological traces suggests a thoroughness that extends beyond conventional administrative measures. More puzzling is the apparent knowledge that Augustus's agents possessed regarding the artifact's significance. Their efforts to eliminate traces of its existence suggest understanding that extended beyond mere political calculation. What information did they possess about the object's true nature, and how did they acquire this knowledge? The precision of their campaign implies access to sources that remain hidden from historical investigation. The imperial purge interpretation must also explain why subsequent emperors continued the policy of suppression. If Augustus had successfully eliminated the artifact and its associated threats, why did later rulers maintain the prohibition against investigating its existence? The persistence of this taboo across multiple reigns suggests that the object's elimination had not fully resolved the dangers it represented. The living myth. The most romantically compelling interpretation suggests that the artifact transcended its physical existence to become something far more dangerous. A persistent myth that continued to shape human behavior long after the object itself had vanished. According to this theory, the true power of Caesar's artifact lay not in any inherent supernatural properties, but in its capacity to inspire belief, ambition, and desperate action among those who sought to possess or destroy it. Throughout subsequent centuries, historical sources contain tantalizing references to objects that may represent echoes of Caesar's artifact. Medieval chronicles describe relics of Roman origin that possessed unusual properties. Renaissance scholars speak of artifacts that survived the fall of the empire, hidden in monasteries or private collections. Even modern archaeological discoveries occasionally yield items that seem to match ancient descriptions of Caesar's mysterious possession. These later references suggest that the artifact or objects believed to be connected to it continued to circulate through hidden networks of collectors, scholars, and seekers of forbidden knowledge. The myth of Caesar's artifact may have inspired the creation of replicas, forgeries, or entirely new objects that borrowed elements from the original legend. The boundary between authentic artifact and inspired imitation becomes meaningless when the object's power derives from belief rather than inherent properties. This interpretation explains the extraordinary persistence of suppression efforts across multiple historical periods. If the artifact's influence operated through myth rather than physical presence, then its elimination would require not merely the destruction of objects, but the complete erasure of ideas. Such a campaign would necessarily extend across generations, involving successive rulers, religious authorities, and scholarly institutions in a continuous effort to contain dangerous knowledge. The mythological interpretation also accounts for the apparent supernatural phenomena associated with the artifact's existence. Individuals who believe themselves to be in possession of Caesar's artifact or objects connected to it might indeed have experienced psychological effects that manifested as supernatural events. The power of suggestion, combined with the weight of historical legend, could have produced genuine phenomena that reinforced belief in the object's extraordinary nature. Evidence supporting this theory emerges from the documented behavior of individuals who claimed knowledge of the artifact's fate. Their actions often seem to reflect belief in powers that extended beyond rational explanation, suggesting that the mere idea of the artifact continued to exert influence over human behavior. The myth itself became a force capable of shaping historical events through its impact on those who encountered it. Yet, the mythological interpretation must confront the same evidentiary challenges that plague other theories. If the artifact's power derived from myth rather than reality, what explains the extraordinary measures taken to suppress even indirect references to its existence? Myths typically persist through oral tradition and written record. The systematic elimination of all traces suggests a campaign against something more substantial than collective imagination. More troubling is the apparent effectiveness of suppression efforts. Most historical myths prove remarkably resistant to official prohibition, persisting in folk tradition even when formal documentation disappears. The nearly complete erasure of references to Caesar's artifact suggests either unprecedented success in controlling information flow or the elimination of something that possessed more tangible reality than mere legend. The question that remains: each theoretical framework offers partial explanations for the mystery surrounding Caesar's artifact, yet none fully accounts for the extraordinary circumstances of its disappearance. The skeptical position struggles to explain the documented efforts to suppress something that allegedly never existed. The symbolic interpretation cannot adequately address the specific supernatural phenomena reported by multiple independent witnesses. The accidental loss theory fails to account for the systematic erasure of written references. The imperial purge hypothesis raises questions about the thoroughness and persistence of suppression efforts. The mythological framework must explain how even myths can be so completely eliminated from historical memory. Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is that each theory contains elements of truth, but that the complete explanation extends beyond the boundaries of conventional historical analysis. The artifact may have been simultaneously real and symbolic, powerful and dangerous, physical and mythical. Its elimination may have required measures that combined political calculation, supernatural knowledge, and systematic deception on a scale that challenges modern understanding of ancient capabilities. The silence that surrounds this mystery extends beyond mere absence of evidence to encompass the active suppression of investigation itself. Throughout subsequent centuries, scholars who approach too closely to the truth regarding Caesar's artifact have found their research mysteriously obstructed, their sources unexpectedly unavailable, their conclusions subject to challenges that extend beyond academic discourse. The pattern suggests that whatever forces eliminated the artifact also established mechanisms to prevent its rediscovery. As the shadows of ancient Rome continue to yield their secrets to modern archaeology and scholarship, one question persists with increasing urgency. If Caesar's artifact was merely legend, why does its memory continue to inspire such extraordinary efforts at concealment? And if it was real, What power could possibly justify the enormous cost of keeping it hidden for more than 2 millennia? The answer may lie not in the artifact itself, but in the fundamental question it raises about the nature of power, the price of knowledge, and the lengths to which civilizations will go to protect themselves from truths too dangerous to acknowledge. The spade and brush of modern archaeology have unearthed secrets that written history attempted to bury, yet when applied to the mystery of Caesar's artifact, these tools reveal a landscape of tantalizing fragments and deliberate absences that deepens rather than resolves the enigma. The archaeological record, typically archaeology's most reliable witness, speaks in whispers when confronted with this particular mystery. In 1887, during excavations beneath the Palatine Hill, Italian archaeologist Rodolfo Lanciani uncovered what appeared to be remnants of Caesar's private residence. Among the marble fragments and household pottery, his team discovered a peculiar depression carved into the villa's foundation stone, a circular indentation precisely matching later descriptions of the artifact's resting place. The depression bore traces of metallic residue that chemical analysis revealed to contain elements unknown in conventional Roman metallurgy. More intriguing were the scorched patterns surrounding this circular void. The marble showed heat damage radiating outward in geometric configurations that defied explanation through conventional fire damage. Dr. Giovanni Boni, who examined the site in subsequent years, noted in his private correspondence that the burn patterns resembled symbols of astronomical significance, as if the very stone recorded celestial movements. These observations, dismissed by contemporary scholars as imaginative speculation, take on renewed significance when considered alongside ancient descriptions of the artifact's supposed properties. The most controversial discovery emerged from Lanciani's excavation of what he identified as Caesar's private study. Embedded within the villa's walls, archaeological teams found fragments of what appeared to be crystal formations, not naturally occurring minerals, but manufactured components bearing tool marks consistent with ancient craftsmanship. Laboratory analysis revealed that these crystal fragments contained trace elements that suggested origins far beyond the Mediterranean world, possibly from regions unknown to Roman geographical knowledge. Yet these tantalizing discoveries vanished under circumstances that mirror the original artifact's disappearance. Lanciani's detailed notes, sketches, and photographic plates disappeared from the Roman archaeological archives sometime between 1889 and 1891. The crystal fragments themselves were reportedly transferred to the Vatican for specialized examination and never returned to public access. Even the precise location of the excavation site became subject to dispute, with subsequent investigators unable to locate the foundation depression that had generated such intense scholarly interest. Egyptian archaeological expeditions have yielded equally provocative and equally problematic evidence. In 1923, during excavations near Alexandria's ancient harbor, British archaeologist Ronald Wainwright uncovered what he described as a workshop of supernatural dimensions within the ruins of the Great Library Complex. Among the scattered papyrus fragments and broken astronomical instruments, his team discovered references to the Roman device and detailed instructions for creating protective amulets specifically designed to shield the bearer from the corruption of Western artifacts. These papyrus fragments, written in Demotic script during the early Roman period, contain technical diagrams that seem to describe the internal structure of an object matching ancient descriptions of Caesar's artifact. The texts reference collaboration between Egyptian priests and the woman who rules from the West, an apparent reference to Cleopatra, in the creation of countermeasures against the brass mirror that reflects eternity. The implications were staggering. Evidence that Egyptian scholars had not only encountered Caesar's artifact but had developed specific techniques to neutralize its influence. However, Wainwright's discoveries suffered a fate remarkably similar to Lanciani's findings. A fire in the expedition's storage facility in 1924 consumed the original papyrus fragments before they could be fully translated. Only Wainwright's preliminary notes survived, and these contained frustrating gaps where the most crucial technical details should have appeared. The archaeologist himself died under mysterious circumstances during a subsequent expedition to Upper Egypt, taking whatever additional knowledge he possessed to his grave. Modern technological approaches have yielded results that simultaneously confirm and complicate these earlier discoveries. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of the Palatine Hill, conducted between 2003 and 2007, revealed subsurface anomalies consistent with Lanciani's descriptions of Caesar's villa foundations. However, when excavation teams attempted to access these areas, they encountered bureaucratic obstacles that prevented detailed investigation. Permission applications disappeared into administrative labyrinths, funding sources mysteriously withdrew support, and local authorities cited concerns about structural stability that independent engineers found unconvincing. CT scanning technology applied to museum artifacts from Caesar's era has produced equally ambiguous results. Several objects in the Vatican Museum's collection, officially catalogued as Roman household items of uncertain provenance, display internal structures that appear inconsistent with conventional ancient manufacturing techniques. X-ray analysis reveals complex geometries within seemingly simple bronze and ceramic pieces, suggesting functions that extend beyond mere decorative or utilitarian purposes. Most disturbing are the results of isotopic analysis performed on metallic fragments recovered from various Roman sites. A significant percentage of these samples contain elemental compositions that cannot be matched to any known ancient mining sources. The isotopic signatures suggest origins that predate conventional understanding of Roman metallurgical capabilities, implying access to materials or techniques that challenge established archaeological timelines. Dr. Elena Rossi, leading a collaborative research project between the University of Rome and the Smithsonian Institution, has documented what she terms systematic gaps in the archaeological records surrounding Caesar's final years. Museum collections that should contain artifacts from this period show inexplicable absences. Private collections assembled during the 19th century, when archaeological oversight was minimal, display curious patterns of missing items from precisely the time frame when Caesar's artifact supposedly existed. Even more puzzling is the fate of numerous archaeological expeditions that have attempted to investigate sites connected to Caesar's artifact. Since Wainwright's mysterious death in 1924, at least 7 major archaeological projects focused on this mystery have encountered unusual obstacles. Excavation permits have been revoked without explanation, funding has been withdrawn by anonymous benefactors, and team members have reported equipment failures that defy technical explanation. The application of DNA analysis to organic materials recovered from Caesar-era sites has produced results that raise more questions than they answer. Hair and textile fragments that should provide insights into the lives of Caesar's inner circle instead yield genetic markers that suggest contact with populations from regions far beyond Roman influence. These anomalous results, published in obscure technical journals, hint at connections between Caesar's Rome and civilizations that conventional history insists had no contact with the Mediterranean world. Digital reconstruction techniques, applied to fragmentary evidence from multiple archaeological sites, have produced three-dimensional models of objects that correspond remarkably closely to ancient descriptions of Caesar's artifact. However, these reconstructions reveal structural features that challenge understanding of ancient technological capabilities. The implied engineering sophistication suggests manufacturing techniques that seem more consistent with much later historical periods. Perhaps most troubling is the discovery that many potentially relevant archaeological sites have been systematically disturbed by unknown parties prior to official excavation. Subsurface surveys reveal evidence of earlier intrusions, carefully executed excavations that removed specific items while leaving others untouched. The precision of these interventions suggests knowledge of exactly what to seek and where to find it. Contemporary archaeological databases, when searched for references to Caesar's mysterious artifact, reveal patterns that mirror the ancient conspiracy of silence. Digital archives contain fragments of reports that reference unusual discoveries from relevant sites, but the detailed documentation that should accompany such findings remains mysteriously unavailable. Freedom of information requests disappear into administrative bureaucracies, and researchers who pursue these lines of inquiry report subtle but persistent obstacles to their investigations. The most recent technological approaches, including satellite imaging, magnetic resonance surveys, and chemical signature analysis, have identified dozens of sites throughout the former Roman Empire that display characteristics consistent with the storage or manipulation of unusual artifacts. Yet attempts to investigate these locations encounter the same patterns of obstruction that have plagued this mystery for more than a century. Archaeological evidence, traditionally the most objective witness to historical truth, thus presents a paradox when applied to Caesar's artifact. The fragments that survive suggest the existence of something extraordinary, yet the systematic elimination of evidence implies forces committed to preventing complete understanding. Each technological advance promises to resolve the mystery, yet each investigation reveals new layers of deliberate concealment. The Earth itself seems to guard this secret jealously, yielding just enough evidence to confirm that something of profound significance once existed, while withholding the crucial details that would allow complete reconstruction of the truth. In the shadows between confirmed discovery and systematic suppression, the mystery deepens, suggesting that some archaeological truths carry dangers that extend far beyond academic understanding into realms where knowledge itself becomes a weapon too powerful for any single civilization to wield. As modern science approaches ever closer to technologies that might finally reveal the complete truth about Caesar's artifact, the question becomes not whether such revelation is possible, but whether forces that have guarded this secret for 2 millennia will permit such dangerous knowledge to emerge into the light of contemporary understanding. Beyond the reach of academic analysis and archaeological investigation lies a realm where history dissolves into myth, where documented fact transforms into whispered legend, and where the mystery of Caesar's artifact takes on dimensions that transcend rational explanation. These are the stories that survive in the spaces between official records, passed down through generations who understood that some truths can only be preserved in the language of legend. Medieval chroniclers, writing centuries after the fall of Rome, preserved fragments of lore that paint the artifact's disappearance in supernatural hues. The Chronicle of Fredegar, composed in 7th century Gaul, contains a peculiar passage describing the mirror of destinies that the betrayer Brutus carried into the forests of Germania, where it was buried beneath roots that drink the blood of kings. The text suggests that Brutus, consumed by guilt over his role in Caesar's assassination, fled Rome carrying the artifact as both penance and protection against divine retribution. This legend finds curious echoes in Germanic folklore, where stories persist of a Roman nobleman who wandered the dark forests carrying a window into tomorrow's sorrow. These tales, collected by medieval monks and preserved in monastic libraries, describe a figure who could perceive future tragedies, but was condemned never to prevent them. The nobleman eventually disappeared into the deepest woodlands, taking his cursed burden to a place where time itself grows thick as honey, and tomorrow cannot find yesterday. More disturbing are the accounts that suggest Brutus was not acting alone in his custodianship of the artifact. References scattered through various medieval texts hint at the existence of a secret brotherhood, formed in the immediate aftermath of Caesar's death, dedicated to ensuring that the artifact never again fell into the hands of any single ruler. This shadowy organization, which some sources call the Custodes Temporis, the Guardians of Time, allegedly maintained watch over the artifact's hiding place across the centuries. The legend of Cleopatra's involvement weaves through Egyptian and Coptic traditions with remarkable persistence. 4th century Coptic texts, discovered in the Nag Hammadi library, reference the queen who stole eternity from the West and carried it home to the land of the pyramid builders. These accounts suggest that Cleopatra's hasty departure from Rome involved more than mere political calculation. She allegedly absconded with Caesar's artifact, viewing it as rightful Egyptian property that had been taken from Alexandria's ancient repositories. Egyptian folklore preserves stories of a hidden chamber beneath the Great Sphinx, where the Roman mirror rests alongside other artifacts too dangerous for mortal comprehension. According to these legends, Cleopatra sealed the artifact within this repository before her own death, establishing a priesthood to guard against its rediscovery. The chamber supposedly contains not only Caesar's artifact but also the accumulated mystical treasures of the Ptolemaic dynasty, waiting for a time when humanity proves worthy of such knowledge. Islamic scholars of the medieval period added their own layers to this mythology. The great historian al-Masudi, writing in the 10th century, referenced Byzantine sources that described the cursed talisman of the Roman tyrant, hidden in the city of glass beneath the Eastern Sea. This mysterious city of glass, according to various Arabic texts, serves as a repository for dangerous knowledge from the pre-Islamic world, guarded by jinn who ensure that forbidden wisdom remains beyond human reach. Alchemical manuscripts from the Renaissance period reveal a fascinating evolution of the artifact's legend. European alchemists, obsessed with the transformation of base metals into gold, believed that Caesar's artifact represented the ultimate expression of their art, a device capable of transmuting not mere matter, but the fabric of reality itself. The Taba Philosophorum, an influential alchemical text, contains cryptic references to the Roman work and provides symbolic instructions for recreating Caesar's artifact through alchemical processes. These alchemical traditions suggest that various medieval scholars attempted to reconstruct the artifact based on fragmentary descriptions preserved in ancient texts. Several European libraries contain manuscripts describing failed experiments to create mirrors of time, using combinations of metals, crystals, and geometric configurations derived from Roman sources. The consistent failure of these attempts only reinforced the legend that the original artifact possessed properties that transcended conventional craftsmanship. The Knights Templar, those mysterious guardians of medieval Christendom, allegedly possessed knowledge of the artifact's true location. Interrogation records from their trials in the early 14th century contain references to the Mirror of Caesar among the treasures supposedly hidden in their secret repositories. Some accounts suggest that the Templars viewed the artifact as a test of divine providence. Its eventual rediscovery would signal the approaching end of earthly kingdoms and the establishment of divine rule. Even more intriguing are the connections drawn between Caesar's artifact and other legendary objects. Medieval texts occasionally link it to the Holy Grail, suggesting that both artifacts served similar functions as vessels for divine knowledge. The Pearl's Vows, a 13th century Grail romance, contains a curious passage describing the mirror that showed Arthur the fate of Rome, hidden where Caesar's ghost still walks among the shadows of empire. Folk traditions from across Europe preserve stories that seem to reference encounters with Caesar's artifact throughout subsequent centuries. Bavarian legends speak of a wandering hermit who carried a glass that showed the deaths of kings and appeared in villages before great political upheavals. Scottish folklore describes a mysterious object that washed ashore on remote islands, bringing visions of ancient battles to those who gazed upon it before disappearing with the next tide. Perhaps most unsettling are the accounts that suggest the artifact's influence extends beyond its physical presence. Various medieval chronicles describe individuals who claim to have dreamed of Caesar's artifact, experiencing visions so vivid that they altered the dreamer's understanding of past and future events. These visionary episodes often preceded significant historical developments, leading some to believe that the artifact continued to shape human destiny even from its place of concealment. The persistence of these legends raises profound questions about the nature of historical memory and the transmission of forbidden knowledge. Why do stories of Caesar's artifact continue to emerge across different cultures and historical periods? What psychological need do these myths fulfill that ensures their survival across millennia? The very longevity of these legends suggests that they serve functions that extend beyond mere entertainment or historical curiosity. Modern folklorists have noted curious similarities between contemporary UFO encounters and ancient descriptions of Caesar's artifact. Both phenomena involve objects that seem to transcend conventional physical laws, that provide glimpses of knowledge beyond normal human comprehension, and that disappear in ways that suggest deliberate concealment rather than random loss. These parallels raise disturbing questions about whether the legends surrounding Caesar's artifact reflect encounters with forces that exist outside conventional historical understanding. The artifact's legend has also found expression in esoteric traditions that claim direct lineage from ancient Roman mystery cults. Various occult groups throughout history have asserted possession of either Caesar's artifact itself or detailed knowledge of its construction and operation. While such claims typically lack credible evidence, their persistence suggests that the artifact's legend continues to attract those who seek power through supernatural means. What emerges from this tapestry of legend and folklore is not a coherent historical narrative, but rather a pattern of persistent belief that something of extraordinary significance was indeed lost with Caesar's death. The myths refuse to fade, the legends continue to evolve, and new generations discover in this ancient mystery a symbol of possibilities that transcend the boundaries of recorded history. In the end, perhaps the most significant aspect of these legends is not their factual accuracy, but their enduring power to capture human imagination. They speak to fundamental questions about the nature of power, the price of knowledge, and the possibility that history contains hidden pivots where single decisions shaped the entire trajectory of human civilization. Whether Caesar's artifact existed as physical reality or mythical symbol becomes less important than its continued capacity to inspire wonder, fear, and the haunting suspicion that some truths are too dangerous to be preserved in any form other than legend. The whispers persist in the shadows, carried by voices that understand the difference between what happened and what was allowed to be remembered. And in their persistence lies perhaps the most unsettling truth of all, that some secrets survive precisely because they are too important to die.